money to the person in the booth, and it probably was this booth, very likely, that was out on the east side of town. The thing about this toll booth, besides the fact that it's had a wonderful restoration, is, and it just amazes me, nobody ever tore it apart and burned it for firewood. You understand what I'm saying? It's so remarkable to have an original toll booth from a plank road. This is very, very, very rare. And so when you go over and take a look at it, just understand that it's had a restoration, but the original toll booth is hidden in there. And this toll booth eventually ended up down, I don't know the whole history of it. It did end up downtown where a sheltered policeman that had to direct traffic, and he went in there and sat, and I guess until the traffic got heavy or something. And eventually it came to Dick and Helen Hall, and they had it in their backyard for a number of years. And when they had their auction, they gave it to the Historical Society. So the toll booth here is very, very rare. It's something extremely precious for the society to have, and of course it just looks magnificent. Well, Plank Road had not quite reached St. Louis when shocking news came to the Plank Road owners, the investors. There had been talk of a railroad running from Saginaw to St. Louis, and the talk suddenly went from talk to action. A company had been formed, it was well financed, they surveyed the line, and work began on a railroad, the Saginaw Valley and St. Louis Railroad. This meant bad news to toll road owners because the train was going to take away most of the freight traffic, virtually all of the passenger traffic that had been coming on the toll road, the Plank Road. And so stagecoaches, it brought so many people to Mineral Springs, 2 left Saginaw every day and 2 left St. Louis, back to Saginaw every day, and sometimes there were even up to 3 or 4 when throngs of people were coming to take the baths and drink the magic water. And so that was how the Plank Road was going to make a lot of money. And all of a sudden, if there's a train, that's going to be gone, and by law, the Plank Road has to be maintained. It would have to be maintained on local traffic and the tolls that people would pay. Well, the railroad was built, and the stagecoach went out of business between Saginaw and St. Louis. And of course, the railroad came on the grade that is still here. It's probably been improved and raised at some point during the years. But as it comes right through here, this is the original route of the Saginaw Valley and St. Louis Railroad. The railroad rail laying got within a mile or so of St. Louis, and the company ran out of rails. And the reason for this is that the iron company in Toledo could not keep up with the demand for rails. This was the beginning of a boom of railroad building throughout the country, and the demand for rails was just immense. Lowton Eastman of Saginaw, the president of the railroad company, dickered with the company in Toledo and was able to get a train of rails sent through special from Toledo to Saginaw, and they were switched immediately onto the track, the new tracks heading towards St. Louis, and rails were brought up to the end, and the Gandy dancers went out and started laying rails and brought them right up through here on the other side of this depot and went on down into the next block. The company had said to the city, as was customary, you have to furnish us a depot. So the original depot was built down where part of the elevator is today. And that was on the north side of the rail. On the south side of the rail was a turntable. The turntable was there so that when the train came in, the engine and tender could unhook from the train and be shunted over onto the turntable, turned halfway around, come down the siding, get back on the main line, back up, and hook onto what had been the rear of the train, and they could tow the train then to Saginaw instead of pushing the train backwards. They could have done that, but there was a reason for wanting to pull the train. The reason was the locomotive had a cow catcher on it, and there were not fences along most of this railroad, and people did have cows, and sometimes the cow would get on the track, and if you were backing up, you'd smack the cow with the caboose. And it would be much better for everybody concerned if you simply pushed the cow off the track with the cow catcher. Now the cow would probably be damaged in the process, and farmers did sue the railroad at different times for hurting their animals, or in some cases the animal suffered a fatality. And so that would be the reason for the turntable, because it was the end of the line. There wasn't any further to go. And so you had the end of the line right up here in the next block at the depot with the turntable. And they decided to set a day for a celebration when the first official train would come from Saginaw to St. Louis. And St. Louis people were all excited. So on this day, early in the morning, all the Saginaw dignitaries came down and they boarded 2 passenger coaches. The locomotive Gratiot was all steamed up, ready to go. And they probably added a car and maybe the caboose for ballast, which would give the train a little more weight so the passengers didn't, get thrown around at all. And they headed out. It took them about an hour and a half to get to St. Louis. It was a what? This is supposed to be the latest in conveniences. An hour and a half? Well, they stopped all along the way to pick up more people, and they did encounter some cows. And they had to stop the train and get off and persuade Bossy to get off the track so that the train could proceed. So it took them quite a while. Excitement was building in St. Louis. People had come down to the depot down here. They were just waiting and watching down the track for the puff of smoke that indicated the locomotive was in sight. And sure enough, that happened. In mid-morning, the train arrived, and everything broke loose. The description is something like this. The train arrived, blew its shrieking whistle, children ran helter-skelter, dogs barked, a cannon was fired, and old men tipped the bottle. And then the dignitaries got off, the speeches were made, and all the hoopla that had to accompany this. And then people went downtown to Cresses Hall, where they had their dinner, which would be the noon meal back then. They had a feast. They described it this way: the tables groaned under the load of food. And one man who even had an old pet bear killed the bear, and they had bear steak. So it was a banner day for St. Louis, well, sort of like today is, in a sense. These special occasions are rare. So the train came to St. Louis. The railroad arrived, and then a railroad is extended from the end of the line by another company over to Alma, and then on points west through what later became Elwell, Riverdale, Vestaburg, Cedar Lake, Edmore, and clear to Lakeview. And that company also had to build a depot, so there were 2 depots down here, almost adjoining one another. And then through consolidations, they began to use mainly the one depot, and the other depot burned. And then they finally decided that the existing depot, the original old depot, was too small, and so they moved down to this site and they built a depot, not this depot. And the other original first depot became a freight depot. I'm saying depot an awful lot. In the 20s, the depot that was here caught fire and burned as a total loss. They pulled a passenger car onto the track, onto a siding, and it served as a temporary depot while this building was being built. And I assume they probably figured this was basically fireproof, being made out of cement and blocks. And of course, the canopies were a special feature for all the passengers who especially were getting on and off the train in bad weather. So that has brought us up to the present depot here. Well, I would like to close with a final story, and then this relates to the Republic truck. In 1912, the Alma Manufacturing Company was making a 1-cylinder engine. I describe it as a putt engine. It was one with those big flywheels, and once you got it going, it only fired when it started to slow down. And so the flywheel's going around, and it slows down, and it goes putt, and faster, and it slows down, putt. And this was a very efficient kind of engine, and it was the Vickers engine, and it was good because it didn't have as many parts as other engines, so there weren't as many parts to wear out. Well, a man came along named Frank Ruggles, and he joined the company, and he wanted to make a truck. And so he designed a truck that they called the Alma truck. And they built one, and the prototype was